What happens when two of Hollywood's most beloved personalities clash on live television in a way nobody saw coming? The tension in the studio was palpable as Jason Momoa sat across from Kelly Clarkson, and what started as a friendly conversation quickly spiraled into one of the most shocking moments in daytime talk show history. Before we get into exactly what went down, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about celebrity interviews going off the rails. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. The interview began pleasantly enough. Kelly opened with her signature warmth, welcoming Jason to the show with genuine enthusiasm. The audience applauded as he settled into the guest chair, flashing that famous smile that had charmed millions. Kelly started with what seemed like a softball question about his latest project, a film that had been generating buzz for months. So, Jason, I have to say, I watched the trailer for your new movie, and it looks absolutely incredible, Kelly said, leaning forward with interest, but I've been reading some of the early reviews, and there seems to be some controversy around the environmental message in the film. Some critics are saying it feels a bit preachy. What's your take on that? Jason's smile faltered slightly. He shifted in his seat, and you could see something change in his expression. Preachy, he repeated, letting the word hang in the air. That's an interesting choice of words, Kelly. I'm curious. Did you actually watch the film or just the trailer? The audience went quiet. Kelly's eyebrows raised and she let out a small laugh, clearly trying to keep things light. Well, I watched the trailer and I read several reviews to prepare for our conversation. That's what we do here, right? Right. Jason nodded, but his tone had shifted. So, you're asking me about a film you haven't actually seen based on what other people told you to think about it. That's fascinating. Kelly's smile tightened. Jason, that's not exactly fair. I'm asking you about the criticism the film is receiving. That's a legitimate question. This is how interviews work. Is it though? Jason leaned back, crossing his arms. Because it seems to me like you're more interested in stirring up controversy than actually having a real conversation. The environmental message you're calling preachy. It's about the actual destruction of our oceans. It's about real things happening to our planet right now. But yeah, let's call it preachy because caring about something is apparently a bad thing these days. The tension in the studio was now impossible to ignore. Kelly straightened up, and you could see her shifting from friendly host mode to something more defensive. Okay, I think you're misunderstanding my question. I'm not saying I think it's preachy. I'm asking you to respond to that criticism. There's a difference, but you chose to lead with that. Jason countered, out of everything you could have asked me, you went straight for the negative angle. You could have asked me about the story, about working with the cast, about the actual message we're trying to convey, but instead you wanted to talk about what critics think is wrong with it. Kelly took a breath, and you could see her trying to regain control of the interview. Jason, I've interviewed hundreds of people on this show. Part of my job is to ask questions that the audience wants answers to, including difficult ones. If you can't handle a basic question about your film's reception, then maybe you're not ready for this kind of conversation. That last line like a bomb. The audience gasped audibly. Jason's jaw clenched, and he stared at Kelly for a long moment. Not ready for this kind of conversation, Kelly. I've been doing this for years. I've sat through countless interviews, answered the same questions 1,000 times, smiled and nodded while people reduce my work to sound bites and hot takes. What I'm not ready for is being ambushed on a show that's supposed to be about positivity and connection. Ambushed. Kelly's voice rose slightly. I asked you one question about critical reception. That's not an ambush. That's journalism. And frankly, your reaction is pretty telling. Telling about what exactly? Jason shot back. But I care about my work. That I'm tired of the media machine turning everything into drama. You want to talk about telling? Let's talk about how you framed this entire conversation from the start. Kelly shook her head, and you could see frustration creeping into her expression. You know what? I think we need to take a step back here. This is clearly going in a direction neither of us intended. No, I think it's going exactly where you intended, Jason said, his voice steady but intense. You wanted a moment, something that would get people talking. And congratulations, you got it. But this isn't journalism, Kelly. This is entertainment masquerading as conversation. And I'm not interested in playing that game. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Kelly looked directly at Jason, and her tone became more measured, almost cold. I have to say, I'm really surprised by this reaction. I've always admired your work, and I thought this would be a great conversation. But if you feel like you're being attacked by a simple question about your film, then maybe the problem isn't with the question. Jason stood up slightly, then sat back down, visibly trying to control his emotions. You want to know what the problem is? The problem is that we're sitting here talking about what critics think instead of talking about why this film matters. We spent 3 years making something that we genuinely believe could make a difference, could maybe inspire people to care about what's happening to our environment. And the first thing you want to discuss is whether we're being too preachy about wanting to save the planet. I never said that, Kelly interjected. You're putting words in my mouth now, am I? Because that's exactly what you implied with your question. And now you're acting like I'm the one being unreasonable for pushing back. Kelly leaned forward, her voice firm. Jason, I think you need to understand something. When you come on a show like this, you're going to get asked questions about your work, including questions about how it's being received. If you can't handle that without getting defensive and accusing me of having some kind of agenda, then maybe you should reconsider doing these kinds of interviews. Maybe I should, Jason said quietly, and you could hear the edge in his voice. Maybe I should stop pretending like these interviews are about anything other than filling time and creating clips for social media. The atmosphere in the studio had gone from uncomfortable to genuinely hostile. Kelly's producer could be seen off camera looking concerned, but Kelly pressed on. That's really dismissive of what we do here. This show has always been about real conversations, about connecting with people and hearing their stories. If you think that's just filling time, then I don't know what to tell you. Real conversations. Jason's laugh was bitter. Kelly, when's the last time you had a real conversation on this show? When's the last time someone sat in this chair and you actually listened to them instead of just waiting for your next question? When's the last time you went off script and just talked to someone like a human being? Kelly's face flushed. That's incredibly unfair. I have genuine conversations with my guests all the time. Just because this one isn't going the way you want doesn't mean I'm not listening. You're not listening right now, Jason said, his voice rising. You're defending yourself. You're justifying your approach, but you're not actually hearing what I'm saying. I'm trying to tell you that this whole system is broken, that these interviews have become so formulaic and surface level that they've lost all meaning, and you're taking it as a personal attack, because it is a personal attack. Kelly shot back. You're sitting here on my show telling me I don't know how to do my job. You're accusing me of having ulterior motives when all I did was ask you about your film. So yes, I'm taking it personally because you're making it personal. Attention was now at a breaking point. Jason stood up from his chair, and the audience collectively held their breath. You know what, Kelly? You're right about one thing. This conversation has definitely gone in a direction neither of us intended. And I think that's actually the most honest moment we've had since I sat down. Kelly remained seated, looking up at him with a mixture of anger and confusion. So, what are you doing? Are you walking off? I'm thinking about it, Jason admitted. Because I came here thinking we could have a meaningful conversation about something I care deeply about, and instead we're having an argument about interview etiquette and who's being more unreasonable. Then sit down and let's try again, Kelly offered, though her voice was strained. We can reset, start over with a different question. Jason hesitated, his hand on the arm of the chair. He looked at her for a long moment, and you could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. Finally, he sat back down, but his body language had completely changed. He wasn't leaning in anymore, wasn't open. He sat back, arms still crossed, jaw set. Okay, he said. Let's try this again, but I want to be clear about something first. I didn't come here to fight with you, Kelly. I came here because I thought you were someone who actually cared about having substantive conversations. So, if we're going to continue, I need to know that we're actually going to talk about things that matter, not just play the usual game. Kelly nodded slowly, and you could see her trying to recalibrate. Fair enough. So, let's talk about what matters to you about this film. Forget the critics. Forget the controversy. Tell me why you made this movie. Jason took a breath, and for a moment, it seemed like the tension might actually dissipate. We made this film because the ocean is dying. Kelly, that's not hyperbole. That's not exaggeration. That's just fact. I grew up in Hawaii surrounded by the ocean, and I've watched it change in my lifetime. I've seen reefs die. I've seen coastlines erode. I've seen species disappear. And I wanted to make something that would wake people up to that reality. That's powerful, Kelly said. And her tone had softened. And I think that message is important. But here's what I'm genuinely curious about. Do you think a Hollywood film is really the best vehicle for that message? Because I've heard from environmental activists who feel like celebrity involvement sometimes overshadows the actual work being done on the ground. And just like that, the tension came roaring back. Jason's eyes narrowed. Are you serious right now? We just agreed to have a real conversation, and you're immediately back to the negative framing. Jason, that's not negative framing. Kelly protested. That's a legitimate question about effective activism. No, you're questioning whether I have the right to care about this at all. Jason fired back. You're hiding behind this idea of asking tough questions, but what you're really doing is undermining the message by suggesting that because I'm a celebrity, my involvement is somehow suspect. Kelly's frustration was becoming more visible. That is not what I said. I'm asking about the effectiveness of using entertainment as a vehicle for activism. That's a conversation activists themselves are having, but you're using it to question my motives. Jason insisted. You could have asked me how we worked with environmental organizations. You could have asked about the scientists we consulted, but instead you're essentially asking if I'm doing more harm than good, because that's a question worth asking, Kelly said, her voice rising. Not everything celebrities do in the name of activism is actually helpful. Sometimes it's performative, and yes, sometimes it does overshadow the people doing the real work. Jason leaned forward now, his voice intense. You want to talk about performative? Let's talk about this interview. Let's talk about how you're using environmental activism to create conflict, to get a reaction, to make good television. You don't actually care about the effectiveness of the message. You care about whether this conversation is going to trend on social media. The audience was completely transfixed. Kelly's face had gone from frustrated to genuinely angry. You don't get to tell me what I care about. You don't know me. You don't know my values. And you certainly don't get to sit here and accuse me of exploiting environmental issues for ratings. Kelly stood up now, matching his energy. Because I'm trying to have a nuanced conversation, Jason. I thought you wanted substance, but apparently substance means I'm only allowed to ask you questions that make you feel good about yourself. Substance means actually engaging with the work, with the ideas, with the real issues, Jason countered, standing up again, not using those issues as weapons in some kind of journalistic gotcha game. Kelly threw her hands up. Then what do you want from me, Jason? Because it seems like no matter what I ask, you're going to find a way to twist it into evidence of some agenda I supposedly have. I want you to be honest, Jason said simply. I want you to admit that this was never about the environment or the film or even about having a real conversation. This was about getting a moment, creating something that people will clip and share and argue about online. And you know what? You got it. That's not fair. And you know it, Kelly said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. Now I prepare for every interview. I research my guests. If you think I'm sitting here trying to sabotage you or create drama for its own sake, then you're completely wrong about who I am. Kelly walked to the edge of the stage, then back, clearly trying to compose herself. You know what I think is happening here? I think you came on this show expecting to be treated with kid gloves. You expected me to just promote your movie without any critical engagement. And when I actually tried to have a real conversation, you couldn't handle it. I've been trying to engage with you this entire time, Kelly insisted. But you're so busy being offended that you're not actually listening. Maybe I'm upset because I spent 3 years working on something that I genuinely believe could make a difference, and instead we're having this pointless argument. Kelly pointed at him, her frustration boiling over. You started this, Jason. I asked you one question, and you immediately went on the attack. You accused me of not watching the film, of having an agenda. So don't act like you're the victim here. I turned it into a confrontation. Jason looked genuinely incredulous. Kelly, you questioned whether my activism was performative. You suggested my involvement might be doing more harm than good. How is that not confrontational? It's called critical thinking. Kelly shot back. It's called treating you like an intelligent adult who can handle being questioned instead of like some fragile ego who needs constant validation. The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Jason stared at her, and you could see the anger in his eyes shift to something else. Something colder. Fragile ego, he said quietly. That's what you think this is about, isn't it? Kelly challenged. Because from where I'm standing, you can't handle any criticism without immediately getting defensive. Jason nodded slowly. And when he spoke, his voice was calm but hard. You know what, Kelly? You're right about one thing. I can't do this. I can't sit here and have this conversation with someone who fundamentally misunderstands what I'm trying to say. He started to unhook his microphone, and Kelly's eyes widened. Wait, what are you doing? I'm done, Jason said simply. I'm not going to sit here and be accused of having a fragile ego because I dared to push back. This isn't a conversation, it's a trap. Kelly looked at her producers off camera, then back at Jason. Jason, come on. We can work through this. Let's take a breath and in what? Jason interrupted. Pretend like this didn't happen. Smile for the cameras. I'm not interested in that. So, you're just going to walk off? Kelly asked, and there was a challenge in her voice. Now, you're going to storm off my show because I asked you some tough questions. I'm leaving because this stopped being productive about 10 minutes ago, Jason corrected. That's rich coming from you, Kelly said. That's rich coming from you, Kelly said. You've spent this entire interview lecturing me about listening while completely dismissing everything I've said. You've made assumptions about my intentions, my character, my values, all because I dared to. Ask you questions that weren't suckable. Jason finished unhooking his microphone and placed it carefully on the chair. The movement was deliberate, controlled, which somehow made it even more powerful than if he'd just ripped it off in anger. You're absolutely right, Kelly. I have made assumptions, and maybe some of them were unfair. But you know what? I'd rather own up to that than sit here pretending this is working when it clearly isn't. So that's it, Kelly asked. And there was something in her voice now. Not quite hurt, but close to it. You're just done. No attempt to salvage this. No willingness to try and find common ground. What common ground is there to find? Jason asked, spreading his hands. We fundamentally disagree about what this conversation is even supposed to be. You think you're doing hard, hitting journalism. I think you're creating conflict for entertainment. Those aren't positions we're going to reconcile in the next 5 minutes. Kelly crossed her arms, mirroring his earlier defensive posture. You know what's interesting? You came on this show to promote a film about environmental activism, about making people care about important issues. But the second someone questions your approach, you shut down completely. How is that supposed to inspire anyone? Jason actually laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're really going to try to turn this into a lesson about my commitment to activism. That's incredible. Even now, even as I'm literally walking away, you're trying to score points. I'm trying to understand, Kelly insisted. I'm trying to understand how someone who claims to care so deeply about communication and connection can just give up on a conversation the moment it gets difficult. Difficult. Jason shook his head. Kelly, difficult would be fine. Difficult would be good. Actually, what this is toxic. This is two people talking past each other, attacking each other, using big issues as ammunition in a pointless fight about who's more righteous, and I don't want any part of that. The audience was dead silent. You could feel the discomfort radiating through the studio. Some people were pulling out their phones, probably already posting about what they were witnessing. Others just sat there, transfixed by the train wreck unfolding in front of them. Kelly took a step toward him, and her voice softened slightly. Jason, I genuinely didn't want this to happen. I wanted to have a good conversation with you. I wanted to talk about your film, about the issues you care about. I'm sorry if my questions came across differently than I intended. For a moment, Jason's expression softened, too. I appreciate that. I do. But the problem is, I don't think they came across differently than you intended. I think you knew exactly what you were doing with those questions. And I think you got exactly the reaction you were hoping for. That's not true, Kelly said. And now she sounded genuinely upset. That is not who I am, and it's not what this show is about. If you really believe that, then you don't know me at all. You're right. I don't know you. Jason agreed. I know the public version of you, the TV host version, and maybe that's completely different from who you are in real life. But that's who I'm talking to right now. And that's who asked me those questions. Kelly bit her lip, and for a second, she looked like she might actually cry, but she composed herself quickly. Fine, if that's how you feel, then I guess there's nothing more to say. I'm sorry this didn't work out the way either of us wanted. So am I, Jason said quietly. And there was something genuine in his voice. Now, something that cut through all the anger and defensiveness. I really am sorry, Kelly. Not for pushing back. Not for defending myself, but for the way this ended up. This isn't how I wanted to spend my afternoon. Me either, Kelly admitted. She looked at the audience, then back at Jason. I guess we just proved that even people with good intentions can completely miss each other. Yeah, Jason said. I guess we did. He started to walk toward the exit, and the cameras followed him. Kelly stood there looking lost, like she wasn't sure whether to try to stop him or just let him go. The producers were frantically gesturing off camera, probably trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, whether to cut to commercial, whether to try to smooth things over. But then Jason stopped. He turned back to Kelly, and everyone in the studio held their breath, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this was going to have a different ending after all. "For what it's worth," Jason said, his voice carrying across the studio, "I do think you care about the issues. I think you care about a lot of things. I just think somewhere along the way doing a good show became more important than having good conversations, and I get it. I really do. The pressure to perform, to get ratings, to create moments, it's immense. But that doesn't make it right." Kelly stared at him, and you could see so many emotions playing across her face. Anger, hurt, frustration, maybe even a hint of recognition. "And I think," she said slowly, "that you care so much about being seen as authentic and genuine that you can't accept that someone might genuinely disagree with you without having some ulterior motive. Maybe we're both trapped in our own narratives, Jason." "Maybe we are," he acknowledged. "But at least I'm willing to walk away from mine when it stops serving me." And with that, he turned and walked off the stage. No dramatic storming, no door slamming, just a quiet, deliberate exit that somehow felt more final than any big gesture could have been. Kelly watched him go, and then she turned to the camera. Her professional mask slipped back into place, but you could see the cracks in it. "Well," she said, trying to smile, "that was certainly not what I expected. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll try to process what just happened here." But as the show cut to commercial, you could see her shoulders sag. She looked at her producers, shook her head, and walked off the stage in the opposite direction had gone. The audience sat there in stunned silence. Some people were already on their phones, spreading the news. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation would be all over social media. In that moment in the studio, there was just silence. The kind of silence that comes after something breaks that you're not sure can be fixed. Two people who had come together hoping for connection had instead found conflict. The show did come back from commercial. Kelly addressed what happened, tried to provide some context, took some responsibility while also defending her approach. It was professional, measured, exactly what you'd expect from someone who's been doing this for years. But the spark was gone. The internet exploded. Team Jason versus Team Kelly. Some people praised Jason for standing his ground, for refusing to play the game. Others called him entitled, unable to handle basic scrutiny. Some praised Kelly for asking tough questions. Others accused her of being needlessly confrontational, of prioritizing drama over dialogue. Maybe they were all right. Maybe they were all wrong. Maybe the truth is that two people had a bad conversation, and instead of finding a way through it, they let it spiral until walking away seemed like the only option. Both of them had valid points buried in all that conflict. Jason was right that celebrity interviews often feel hollow. Kelly was right that public figures should be able to handle critical questions. But none of those valid points mattered once the conversation became about winning rather than understanding. So, what do you think? Was Jason right to walk off? Or should he have stuck it out and tried to salvage the conversation? Was Kelly asking legitimate questions, or was she stirring up drama? Here on Chronicle Chat, we believe moments like this show how quickly conversations can turn into confrontations when both sides feel unheard. In my opinion, both Jason and Kelly had valid points, but once the focus shifted from understanding to winning, the conversation was already lost. Make sure to subscribe to Chronicle Chat and drop a comment below with your take. Who do you think was more in the right here, Jason or Kelly?